On my birthday, instead of a celebration, my family gave me the cruelest gift of all. They kicked me out of the house with nothing but a single bag of clothes. What they didn't realize was that their betrayal would unravel their own world, piece by piece, until they were left with nothing. Before we dive into this story, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you never miss a tale of justice. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments. Okay, let's get into it. Birthdays are supposed to be special. They're supposed to be a moment when the people closest to you pause and remind you that you matter. Growing up, I never expected extravagant gifts or surprise parties. But I always thought at the very least, my birthday would be acknowledged with kindness. I couldn't have been more wrong. On the morning of my 32nd birthday, I woke up in the same bedroom I had lived in since I was a teenager. The walls were still painted the same soft lavender I had chosen when I was 15. My life wasn't glamorous by any stretch, but I had always believed that the stability of living under the same roof with family, even as an adult, meant I had a place of belonging. That illusion shattered before the day was over. I remember the smell of coffee wafting from the kitchen as I came downstairs, still half expecting someone might say, "Happy birthday." Instead, my parents were seated stiffly at the dining table, their faces carrying a look I had never seen before. It wasn't neutral. It wasn't loving. It was rehearsed, like they had practiced what they were about to say. My younger brother was lounging nearby, scrolling on his phone, smirking as if he already knew what was coming. "Sit down," my father said curtly. His voice had no warmth in it, not even a trace of acknowledgement for the day. I pulled out a chair cautiously, my heart already picking up its pace. Something in the pit of my stomach told me this wasn't going to be a normal conversation. My mother folded her hands tightly together. "We've been talking," she began, avoiding my eyes. "And we think it's time you moved out. You're too old to be living here. And quite frankly, your brother deserves his own space now." At first, I thought I had misheard. I blinked, waiting for her to crack a smile and say it was a joke. But the silence stretched too long, and the smirk on my brother's face widened into something triumphant. "Moved out?" I repeated slowly. My throat felt dry, and I had to clear it before the words came out. "Today." My father nodded. "The sooner, the better. We don't want to drag this out. You've had long enough here. Your brother needs the bigger room, and honestly, we can't keep carrying the extra weight." The words hit harder than a slap. Extra weight. That was what I was to them. For years, I had been the one contributing to bills, covering groceries when paychecks were tight, and even making payments on the car insurance. I had thought I was part of the household, someone who pulled more than their fair share. But in that moment, I realized they had never truly seen me as essential. I glanced toward my brother. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, practically glowing with satisfaction. He didn't have to say anything. The smugness on his face told me he had been behind this push all along. The irony of it all was almost unbearable. On the very day when I had hoped, even just for a moment, to be celebrated or cherished, I was instead being discarded like a piece of clutter that no longer fit in their home. My chest tightened as I tried to process it. "So, you're really kicking me out? On my birthday?" My voice shook, not from weakness, but from the sheer disbelief that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally could be this cruel. Neither of my parents flinched. My mother simply said, "It's time." And just like that, everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and belonging was ripped away in the span of a few sentences. I walked back upstairs in a daze, grabbed the nearest duffel bag, and stuffed it with whatever clothes I could manage. No time to carefully fold or choose. Just grab, shove, and zip. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. When I walked back out with the bag slung over my shoulder, my brother was already standing in the hallway, ready to gloat. He brushed past me, pushing into my room as though it already belonged to him. He didn't even wait for me to leave before claiming the space. The final blow came when my father opened the door for me, standing aside like a landlord evicting an unwanted tenant. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't say anything at all. As the door shut behind me, the early afternoon sun hit my face, blinding and unforgiving. I stood there on the porch, my heart pounding, clutching that single duffel bag as though it were my last lifeline. And in a way, it was. That was how my birthday began and how everything I thought I could count on came to an end. Asterisk as I stood outside with that single duffel bag slung over my shoulder. The weight of the moment pressed down on me. But to understand why this cut so deep, I need to take you back to the way things were before, to the roles each of us played in that house, and how the balance of our family had been tilting for years. Without me realizing just how much it would cost me, I grew up in what most people would have called an ordinary family. From the outside, we looked stable. A modest home, to parents and to children. My younger brother, Daniel, was the golden child from the moment he was born. I don't say that lightly. My parents doted on him in a way they never did with me. If he scraped his knee, the world stopped. If I excelled in school or worked late shifts to save money, it barely earned a passing nod. As the older child, I was expected to be the responsible one. That was the word my parents always used. Responsible. I did my homework without reminders. I learned to cook simple meals when Mom was working late, and I quietly helped with chores while Daniel sprawled on the couch with video games. At the time, I didn't think much of it. That was just the rhythm of our home. I told myself it was normal that every family had a favorite, and I just happened to be the one in the shadows. By the time I was in my 20s, responsible had grown into something else. Reliable. I had a steady job while Daniel bounced between community college classes and part-time gigs. He never held onto. When bills came due and my parents were short, they turned to me. At first, it was small things covering groceries here and there, paying for new tires when the family car gave out. But slowly, almost without realizing, I began carrying more and more of the household's weight. I remember one particular evening I was about 24 when the electricity bill had gone unpaid. My parents were frantic, arguing about late fees, and Daniel was sulking in the corner about not being able to watch his shows. I had just cashed a paycheck and, without hesitation, handed it over to settle the bill. I told myself it was just what family did. We helped each other. My father clapped me on the shoulder that night, proud for a brief moment. But the gratitude faded quickly. Before long, my willingness became expectation. That became the pattern of my life. Every month, I contributed, sometimes directly paying utilities, sometimes transferring money into joint accounts, sometimes covering emergencies. My name ended up on the car insurance policy, then on the mortgage, because, as my father put it, "You're steady. The bank trusts you." It sounded flattering then, like I was dependable, someone they could rely on. I didn't realize it was also a trap, tying me deeper and deeper into the household finances while erasing any acknowledgement of my sacrifices. Meanwhile, Daniel thrived in the opposite direction. He was coddled, shielded from responsibility. If he wanted the newest phone, he got it. If he crashed his car, my parents scrambled to fix it without consequence. He developed a sharp tongue, always quick to point out what he didn't have, what he thought he deserved. It wasn't unusual for him to call me boring or pathetic when I stayed late at work, even as the money I earned often covered his indulgences. The contrast between us was stark. I was the quiet worker, blending into the background, while Daniel was the loud, demanding presence who always got what he wanted. My parents enabled it at every turn, and I grew used to their blind spots. Somewhere deep down, though, resentment was brewing. I just didn't let myself see it clearly, until the birthday eviction brought it roaring to the surface. Looking back now, I realized the warning signs had been there for years. Subtle comments from my mother about how Daniel needed more room to grow. My father joking about how I should move out someday soon, even though they were still leaning heavily on my financial support. Daniel's smugness every time I picked up the slack, but I ignored those signs, telling myself it was temporary, that one day they would see me, appreciate me, maybe even thank me. That was the dream I clung to, the fantasy that kept me contributing even when it left me drained. The truth was, the normal world of our family was already built on imbalance. I just hadn't realized how fragile it all was. I thought being responsible meant being safe, that giving more meant I had secured my place. I thought loyalty counted for something. It took being kicked out on my birthday to see how wrong I was. I had always imagined that if the day ever came when my parents wanted me to move out, it would happen gradually. Maybe we would sit down, talk through timelines, and plan things in a way that made sense. After all, I wasn't freeloading, I was contributing, and they knew it. So even in that shocking moment on my birthday, part of me clung to the hope that I had misunderstood, that this was some kind of miscommunication. But as I sat at that dining table, staring at my parents' unflinching faces, the truth became clear. This wasn't a discussion. It was a decision already made, and I had no say in it. "Pack your things today," my father said, his voice flat, as though he were reading from a script. "Your brother needs to start moving into your room by the weekend." The phrasing hit me like a punch. Not "we think it's time you started looking for your own place." Not "let's figure out how to transition things smoothly." No, it was an order. A command, and it wasn't even framed around my future or my independence. It was about Daniel, his comfort, his convenience. I looked to my mother, hoping for even a flicker of hesitation, some sign that she might soften the blow. But she avoided my gaze entirely, eyes fixed on the tablecloth as if the floral pattern could shield her from guilt. "Mom?" I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief. "Is this really what you want? On my birthday?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's for the best," she murmured, "for the best." The words echoed in my ears, hollow and cruel. Best for whom? Certainly not for me. Daniel finally spoke up then, not out of necessity, but out of sheer arrogance. "You've been here long enough. Don't act so surprised. It's pathetic. Really grown woman still clinging to mommy and daddy's house. Time to grow up." His words burned, not because they were true, but because they twisted the reality I had been living. I wasn't clinging, I was carrying more than my share, carrying him, carrying them. And yet, here he was, smug and triumphant, as if he had won some invisible competition I never knew we were playing. A cold knot formed in my stomach. My hands curled into fists beneath the table, nails digging into my palms. I willed myself not to explode, not to scream the truth at them that without me, half their bills wouldn't even be paid, that their stability was built on the back of my hard work. But I held it in, swallowing the fury that threatened to choke me. The final straw, the moment that seared itself into my memory, came when I asked, in one last attempt to appeal to reason, "So, where do you expect me to go? Just walk out the door today with nowhere lined up?" My father leaned back in his chair, expression cold and dismissive. "You're an adult. Figure it out." There it was. No compassion, no concern, no acknowledgement of the years I had given. Just a cutting dismissal, as if I were some tenant whose lease had expired. I stood from the table slowly, my chair scraping across the floor. My legs felt heavy, almost unwilling to carry me, but I forced them to move. Daniel smirked as I walked past him, and that smirk, that smug little twist of his lips, was what broke me. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about space. This wasn't just about them wanting me out. This was a betrayal orchestrated for his benefit, and my parents had chosen him over me without hesitation. The line had been crossed. That was the day my family stopped being my family and showed themselves for what they truly were. Users. I went upstairs, grabbed that duffel bag, and shoved clothes inside with shaking hands. The lavender walls of my bedroom seemed to close in on me, each object reminding me of years of loyalty that meant nothing now. My throat tightened as I glanced at the framed photos, the books on the shelf, the little trinkets I had collected over the years. There was no time to pack carefully, no space for sentiment. As I zipped the bag and slung it over my shoulder, I knew something had shifted permanently. A door had been slammed shut in my face, not just the one to my childhood bedroom, but the one to any illusion of safety within those walls. And so, on my 32nd birthday, I walked out the front door carrying nothing but a bag of clothes, and the bitter realization that the people I had sacrificed the most for had just discarded me, like I was nothing. Leaving that house on my birthday felt like stepping into a void. I didn't have a new apartment waiting for me, no carefully packed boxes, no plan. All I had was that duffel bag and a raw ache in my chest that no amount of deep breaths could soothe. I spent the first night at a friend's small apartment, curled up on their couch, replaying every word, every cold glance, every smug look from Daniel. But the thing about betrayal is that it rarely stops at the first blow. My family didn't just discard me, they made sure to twist the knife. It started almost immediately. A day or two after I left, I logged into social media, trying to distract myself, only to see Daniel posting smug updates. Pictures of him grinning in my old bedroom, redecorating it with gaudy posters and neon lights. A caption that read, "Finally upgraded to the big room. #blessed, double quotes." My stomach turned. That room wasn't just for walls. It held years of my life, my books, my photos, my sense of belonging. Watching him claim it so publicly, as if it had been rightfully his all along, felt like erasure. But worse than the gloating were the lies. Within a week, word spread through our extended family. My phone buzzed with calls and messages from aunts, cousins, even an old family friend. The tone was always the same: disapproval. "I heard you left home in a big scene. How could you treat your parents that way after all they've done for you?" The first time I heard those words, I almost dropped the phone. Done for me? They had spun the narrative, painting me as some ungrateful leech who had overstayed my welcome, refusing to pull my own weight. In their version of events, they had sacrificed so much, and I had repaid them with laziness and disrespect. I wanted to scream the truth, that I had been the one paying bills, covering debts, carrying the load no one else wanted to shoulder. But the damage was already done. Once a story takes hold, people cling to it. My parents knew that. They were good at putting on a mask of martyrdom, presenting themselves as the long-suffering victims. And Daniel? He relished in it. He fed the narrative, posting cryptic updates like, "Some people never learn responsibility," making sure the world knew who the irresponsible one was supposed to be. The injustice gnawed at me. Every time I checked my bank account, the bitterness deepened. I saw the steady withdrawals, the automatic payments still flowing into the household expenses. Electricity, internet, insurance all tied to my name. I had been too loyal, too trusting, and now my contributions were propping up the very people who had kicked me out. One evening, I stopped by to collect the rest of my belongings. I told myself it was just a practical trip, nothing more. But the moment I walked through the door, the air was heavy with hostility. Daniel barely acknowledged me, sprawled on the couch like a king in his castle. My mother hovered nearby, arms crossed, as if guarding against me stealing something. When I opened the door to what had once been my room, I froze. Half of my things were gone. My bookshelf was nearly empty, my framed photos missing. My small collection of jewelry nowhere to be found. The desk I had bought with my first paycheck had been shoved into the hallway, dented and scratched. "What happened to my stuff?" I demanded, my voice sharp enough to cut through the tension. Daniel shrugged without looking up from his phone. "We sold some of it. You weren't using it anymore. You should be grateful we didn't just throw it out." Grateful. The word rang in my ears like a cruel joke. I turned to my parents, waiting for them to correct him, to show some hint of remorse. Instead, my father said calmly, "You didn't need all of it. Besides, we had expenses that I had already been covering, expenses they were still siphoning from my accounts, and now they were selling my possessions on top of it. Treating my life as if it were some yard sale to fund Daniel's comforts." That was when the anger inside me began to harden into something else. Betrayal had given way to clarity. For years, I had bent over backward to hold that household together. I had told myself it was loyalty, that family deserved sacrifice. But standing there, staring at the hollow shell of my old room, I finally saw it for what it was. Exploitation. They weren't just kicking me out. They were erasing me. The escalation was complete. What had begun as a cruel eviction had now become a systematic effort to take what they could and bury the rest of me under lies. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The days that followed were some of the darkest I've ever lived. Every corner of my life felt like it had collapsed. I'd wake up on that borrowed couch at my friend's place, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had unraveled so fast. Just a week earlier, I had still believed I was part of a family flawed. Yes, but a family nonetheless. Now, I felt like an exile. The humiliation cut the deepest. Everywhere I turned, I could sense the whispers. Extended relatives who once praised me for being the responsible one now avoided eye contact, parroting the story my parents had spread. Friends I thought were close grew strangely quiet, unsure if they should believe my side or the polished narrative my family had carefully crafted. And through it all, the financial noose tightened. Every automatic withdrawal from my account was like a cruel reminder that I was still feeding the very household that had cast me aside. I called my bank, explained the situation, asked about stopping payments, but because the bills were tied to contracts under my name, untangling it was a nightmare. My parents knew that, and they used it. Every day that passed, they drained me a little more. I remember one night in particular. It was pouring rain outside, the kind that pounds against the windows like it's trying to break in. My friend had gone to bed, and I was sitting at the tiny kitchen table, staring at my dwindling balance on the screen of my laptop. I had just gotten an email confirming another payment had gone through insurance, electricity, water, all still running for the house I no longer lived in. My hands were shaking. My throat burned. And then, for the first time in years, I broke. I cried in a way I hadn't since I was a child. Not the quiet, dignified tears you can blink away, but heavy, racking sobs that left me gasping for air. All the anger, the betrayal, the exhaustion came flooding out at once. I felt like I had wasted years of my life being loyal to people who had never seen me as more than a convenience, a wallet with a heartbeat. I thought about every birthday I had spent making do with family dinners that always seemed to turn into arguments. Every time I had covered a bill so the lights would stay on, only to be told I was selfish for expecting gratitude. Every sacrifice I had made, every time I had put their needs before mine, and how, in the end, they had celebrated my birthday not with love, but with eviction. That was my breaking point. Sitting there, hunched over that kitchen table with the rain pounding outside, I felt something shift inside me. The tears slowed, my breathing steadied, and a new thought rose from the wreckage of my grief. No more. No more paying for people who treated me like a burden. No more letting their lies define who I was. No more shrinking myself to fit into a role they had written for me. I didn't know yet what moving forward would look like, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. If I didn't draw the line now, I would lose myself completely. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes but a sharper mind. The pain was still there, it would always be there, but beneath it was a flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Resolve. If they thought they could erase me, they were wrong. And if they thought I would keep funding their lives while they tore mine apart, they had underestimated just how much strength a person can find once they've been broken. Because I wasn't just broken anymore. I was rebuilding. Asterisk, when you've been stripped of everything, clarity has a way of finding you. For days I'd felt like a hollow shell adrift, powerless, robbed of even the dignity of choosing my own path. But after that night of tears, I woke up with a steadiness I hadn't known before. I made coffee in my friend's cramped kitchen, the bitter smell filling the air, and I sat with my notebook open in front of me. For the first time since I was thrown out, I wasn't just drowning in feelings. I was thinking. My family had always seen me as predictable, dependable, the one who would keep the lights on, sign the papers, and fix the messes. They had mistaken reliability for weakness, as though my willingness to sacrifice meant I had no spine of my own. That was their mistake. And mistakes, I realized, could be used. I thought back over the years, replaying every time I had signed my name on a contract because no one else had good enough credit. Every time I had covered a debt because we're family, and you're the only one who can help. Every time I had been told to just trust us while my signature and my money held everything together. That's when it hit me. My so-called weakness was, in fact, my weapon. They had built their comfort on my shoulders, every bill in my name, every service tied to my accounts. Without me, their world wasn't as solid as they thought. If I stopped paying, if I pulled out my support, if I untangled myself from the web they had spun around me, the whole illusion would collapse. The thought sent a shiver through me. For so long, I had been terrified of what would happen if I stopped helping. Would they spiral into chaos? Would the house fall apart? But now, sitting in that kitchen, I realized that wasn't my responsibility. In fact, it had never been. Their lives were balanced on a structure I had built, and if they had the audacity to cast me out, then they no longer deserved the foundation I provided. So, I began to plan. The first step was practical, untangling my finances. I wrote down every bill, every account, every contract that still had my name on it. Water, electricity, gas, car insurance, even the family phone plan, they were all tied to me. One by one, I circled them, imagining what it would look like to cut those strings. The second step was emotional, steeling myself for the backlash. I knew my parents wouldn't take this quietly. They'd rage, they'd guilt trip, they'd threaten, they'd say I was abandoning family. But I reminded myself of the truth: they had already abandoned me. They had drawn the line, not me. All I was doing now was respecting it. And the third step was the most important: defining what came after. Because this wasn't just about cutting ties, it was about building something new. Something that belonged to me, free of manipulation, free of exploitation. I didn't yet know exactly what that would look like, but the seed was planted. For the first time, the future wasn't just a bleak void. It was a blank page. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the list of bills and contracts. Instead of dread, I felt something else stir inside me. A quiet, simmering strength. They thought they had left me with nothing, but in truth, they had left me with the one thing they couldn't control: my resolve. And that was all I needed. The moment I put pen to paper, my fear began to shrink. Each decision I made, each account I closed, each responsibility I shifted was like cutting another thread from a tangled net. Slowly but surely, I was pulling myself free. The first call I made was to the utility company. I had always been the one to open the accounts because my credit was solid, my payments reliable. I gave the representative my information, confirmed my identity, and then asked them to remove me completely from the household account. It will now be the responsibility of the other occupants, I said, my voice steady. The words tasted powerful on my tongue. Within minutes, it was done. The electricity, the very lifeblood of their comfort, no longer rested on my shoulders. Next came the water and gas, then the internet. Each call followed the same rhythm: polite, professional, final. With every confirmation number scribbled in my notebook, I felt lighter. For years, I had carried the weight of these obligations like invisible chains. Now, with each deliberate action, I was dismantling them link by link. The phone plan was the hardest. My family had always insisted we keep a shared plan to save money, but in reality, it was just another way to keep me tied to them. My hands trembled slightly as I explained to the customer service agent that I would be transferring my line into an individual account and releasing the others. I could already imagine the eruption that would follow when they realized their phones no longer worked under my name. But the thought didn't make me hesitate. Instead, I felt a strange sense of peace. For once, I was not protecting them from consequences. I was letting them experience the reality they had created. One by one, I worked through the list, until the only thing left was the car insurance. My younger brother had been driving a car under my policy for years, barely paying his share, always promising he would get his own soon. Well, that time had finally come. I called the insurance company, removed him from the policy, and set my own coverage independently. By the time I set down the phone, my notebook was filled with confirmation numbers, each one a small victory. I exhaled deeply, as though I had been holding my breath for years. The final step wasn't about cutting ties, it was about reclaiming myself. I opened a new bank account in my name only, transferring the little savings I had managed to keep untouched. I bought a small, second-hand laptop and began applying for remote work opportunities. My income was modest, but it was mine, No one else could touch it. In the space of a week, I had completely shifted the balance. My family, who had cast me out with nothing, were about to discover just how much of their comfort had been propped up by my invisible labor and sacrifice. And this time, when the phone rang with their angry demands, I would not be answering. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. For the first time in my life, I was standing on ground that belonged solely to me. It didn't take long for the storm to break. The first call came from my mother, her voice sharp with panic. "Why is the power company saying the bill is overdue? You've always paid this." Her tone carried the same entitled certainty I had grown up with, like the very idea of her facing consequences was absurd. I listened in silence for a moment, and then I simply said, "It's not my account anymore. It's yours." The pause on the other end was thick, heavy. Then came the sputtering outrage, accusations, guilt trips, the familiar refrain of "we're family. How could you do this to us?" But for once, I didn't let the words pierce me. I repeated, calm and firm, "You kicked me out. You said you didn't want me under your roof, so you don't get the benefit of me holding everything together anymore." And with that, I hung up. The next wave came through text messages from my brother. His phone service had been cut off the night before, and the fury practically dripped from his words. "You ruined everything. I can't even call my friends. You think you're so smart, but you're pathetic. I hope you rot." I stared at the screen, feeling nothing. No hurt, no guilt, not even anger, just clarity. 4 years, I had carried him on my back, paying for his car insurance, covering his mistakes, and this was his gratitude. His rage only confirmed what I already knew. He had never seen me as a sister, only as a resource. Then, one by one, the dominoes fell. The internet went down, the gas bill went unpaid, and the reality of living without me settled over that house like a heavy fog. Friends began to drift away when my family couldn't host parties or show off their comfortable life. The mask slipped, and underneath, they were scrambling. The most satisfying moment came a week later, when my father showed up at my friend's doorstep. He didn't even knock, he banged on the door like a man possessed. When I answered, he stood there red-faced, a mix of fury and desperation. "You think you've won," he spat. "All you've done is make your own family suffer. Do you know how ridiculous you look, cutting us off like this? You're nothing without us." His words hit the air like daggers, but they didn't land. Instead, I felt a strange lightness, as though I was finally seeing him clearly, not as a towering authority, but as a man undone by his own arrogance. I looked him in the eye and said, very evenly, "If you really believed I was nothing, you wouldn't be here begging me to fix your mess." For a second, he froze. Just 1 second. But in that silence, the truth landed. His face twisted, but I could see it, the recognition that their downfall wasn't my doing. It was theirs. They had pushed away the very person holding everything together, and now the foundation was crumbling beneath them. He muttered something bitter under his breath and stormed off, his shoulders stiff with humiliation. That was the day I knew. The balance of power had shifted. I wasn't the one trapped anymore. They were. The final act of their unraveling came almost by accident, though in hindsight, it felt like fate had been waiting for this moment. I was sipping tea in the quiet of my small rented room when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from the bank, an automated notice that the joint family account had slipped into overdraft. My name had once been tied to it, but I had already removed myself weeks before. This time, the warning was, "There's a loan to bear. Curiosity tugged at me, so I checked the balance out of habit. The numbers told a story clearer than words ever could. Missed payments, overdraft fees piling up, and pending charges bouncing back. The financial safety net I had provided for years was gone, and the fall was swift. Later that week, word trickled back to me through mutual acquaintances. The utilities had finally been cut off. No lights, no hot water, no internet. The family that had once lorded their comfort and status over me was now living in the dark, literally. But the true moment of poetic justice arrived on a Friday evening. I was walking home from a part-time job when I passed by their house. The one I had once held together with my name and my sacrifice. The lawn was overgrown, the blinds drawn, and taped to the front door was a bright orange notice. I stopped in my tracks. Even from a distance, I recognized it immediately, a final demand for payment. The kind that comes before the power is shut off permanently. Or worse, before eviction proceedings begin. For years, they had treated me like an afterthought, a background character in their story, useful only as long as I gave and gave without complaint. And now, standing there on the sidewalk, I saw the truth made visible. Without me, the illusion had shattered. I didn't feel triumphant in the loud, dramatic way I once imagined I might. Instead, the satisfaction was quiet, deep, and steady like a weight lifting from my chest. The justice wasn't in watching them suffer. It was in knowing they could no longer deny the truth. Their downfall had been built with their own hands. I stood for a moment longer, watching the house that had once been my prison, and then I turned away. I didn't need to knock, or to gloat, or to say a single word. The notice on the door spoke louder than anything I could have told them. They had kicked me out on my birthday with nothing but the clothes on my back, and now it was they who had nothing. That was the real birthday gift, the freedom to walk away. Finally unburdened, in the weeks that followed, I learned how to breathe again. Not the shallow, careful breaths I had taken under the constant weight of obligation, but deep, steady ones that filled my chest with something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Life wasn't easy at first. My tiny rented room was nothing compared to the house I had once kept afloat. I cooked simple meals on a single burner, budgeted every paycheck from my new remote work, and mended clothes instead of buying new ones. But strangely, I didn't mind. Every small thing I did for myself, no matter how humble, carried a sweetness my old life never had. I didn't have to answer to anyone. I didn't have to explain where my money went, or why I was tired, or why I wanted a moment of quiet. My choices were mine alone, and with that freedom came something priceless. Dignity. My family, on the other hand, continued to spiral. Word spread that they had fallen months behind on bills. The car my brother had been driving without responsibility was repossessed. The utilities were in constant danger of disconnection. Friends who once filled their house vanished when the hospitality dried up. The image of stability they had curated for so long crumbled in full view. I didn't celebrate their suffering, but I also didn't rush to rescue them. That part of my life was over. They had made their decision when they pushed me out, and I had made mine when I chose to step forward instead of looking back. Slowly, I began building something entirely new. With steady work, I grew my savings again. I moved into a small but bright apartment, with my own name on the lease, no strings attached to anyone else. I decorated it with thrift store finds, each piece chosen not for show but for comfort. It wasn't grand, but it was mine, and that made it more beautiful than anything I had left behind. On my next birthday, a year after the night they had thrown me out, I sat at a modest wooden table in my own kitchen. A single candle flickered on a homemade cake. No crowd, no fanfare, Just me and the overwhelming realization that I had given myself the greatest gift of all, freedom. As I blew out the candle, I thought back to that night, when my family's cruelty had left me standing on the street with nothing. They had believed they were breaking me. Instead, they freed me from a life built on exploitation. The moral was as clear as the flame on that candle. Justice doesn't always come in grand, dramatic gestures. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the form of strength you never knew you had, and the peace that follows when you finally claim what's yours. And in my case, justice was poetic. They lost everything they had tried to deny me. I gained everything they thought I could never have. My new normal wasn't perfect, but it was honest, independent, and real. And that was more than enough. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.